a practice problem for final exam. Yes, so I go in. Yes, so this is the one that we are going to talk. For the review questions for final exams. And we already took 1, 2, 3, and then now this class we want to talk about question 4. So this is about the master budgeting. And then basically this question is very similar to the question 3, but it's kind of a little bit more difficult. And then actually question 3 is more difficult. And then question 4 is kind of even simple. So basically here we need to, let me just kind of explain a little bit about. So basically this question asks us about how many units is the company expecting to sell in February. And then now the question tells us about the units to be produced and also desired the ending inventory for January, February, and also March. Right. And then, so this may be a little bit different from what we teach in class, right? So when we teach in class, usually you can solve the questions kind of in a developed way. But for this question, we need to solve it in developed way, which means that we need to assume the budgeted unit sales in February as X first, because we don't know anything about X. Well, and then this is kind of the budgeted unit sales in February. Okay. And now we also know the desired ending finished goods inventory for February is 36,000. And how we get the 36,000? So basically we can get the 36,000 from the question. Right? So the question told us that the ending inventory will be 36,000 for February, right? And then now if we sum up X and also 36,000, then this should be the total needs, okay, for February, right? And then now we minus the beginning finished goods inventory, which is the part that's coming from January, right? So basically here we need to solve the questions like also assume that like the beginning inventory for February, right, is equals to the ending inventory of January, right? So here is how we get the 30,000. So we get 30,000 from here, because the question told us about the ending inventory for January is 30,000. And this should also be the beginning inventory for February, right? And then now if we use the total needs to minus the beginning inventory, then we can get the required production in February, which is 140,000. And this number again is from the question here. And then once we have all this information, then we can have this formula, right? We can have this kind of equation. And then from this equation, we can solve for X, which is the budgeted unit sales in February. So do you have any questions so far about the question 4? So here, let me just kind of have some summary. So basically first, okay, the ending inventory of this balance, right, would be the beginning inventory of next balance, right? This can give you some information that we need to solve the question, right? And also the second important point from this question is that, okay, so we kind of assume X first, right? And then we solve for X. So basically we need to do this in an developed way. Do you have any questions? So if you have any question, please feel free to unmute yourself and speak. Okay. And then if not, maybe we can go to the next question. So look at the question 5. So I just want to wait to see if you have any question about this. And then you can also review the question 3. So basically the way that we use to solve the question 3 is very similar to the method in question 4. We also need to assume X, and we can solve for X later on. And then I will give you some time to do the question 5, or at least you get to be familiar with the question 5 before I talk about this. And this question is long. We will have 5 sub-questions. So we need to do it step by steps. And again, I just want to make sure you can also download this document from Moodle. If not, please feel free to let me know. So I can also show you how to download it from the Moodle. And then for this question, if you think it's too difficult, and we just kind of take a review for the question that we talked in class in chapter 9 about the flexible budget. And basically for the final exams, we will cover chapters 7, 8, 9, 10. And I think the chapters 8 and 9 maybe could be the more difficult ones. And here, let me kind of explain this question a little bit. Okay, so to answer this question, first you need to know about kind of in the budget. Right? We had a flexible budget, and we also had a planning budget. So for the planning budget, it's based on the planned quantity. So like in this question, the budgeted quantity will be 5,600 units. And now actually we produce 5,940 units. So basically our production level is higher than expected or budgeted. And now we need to calculate the kind of variances. So before talking about this question, let me just kind of review a little bit. So basically, when we had so in chapter 9, right? We call this kind of the flexible budget. And then why do we want to have a flexible budget, right? So basically, we will have the actual result, right? On revenues, on costs, etc., right? And expenses. And then we had the planning outcome. We had the planning revenue and also the expenses. And then this based on the budgeted output or the budgeted quantity, right? And now we want to see if we did a good job or not in controlling the costs and getting the profit, etc. Right? However, this kind of an analysis sometimes is less meaningful because now, let's say if we spend more expenses, right? And this could be only due to the fact that basically, like this question, right? Now our actual output or our actual activity is higher than the budgeted one, right? So of course we need to spend more expenses. And this has nothing to do with the CEO's ability or whether the CEO is working hard, whether the CEO is doing a good job in cost control, etc. Right? So that's why we want to insert a column in the middle. So let's say this column 1 is the actual result. And we had the column 3 is about the planning outcomes, like the planning budget. Okay. Then in the middle, we call this the flexible budget. And for flexible budget, we just ask that given the actual output, right? If we use the same function or the same formula to calculate the planning budget, right? Then what would the kind of hypothetical revenue or expenses be, right? So by doing this, we kind of take into account the fact that our actual output is different from the planning output, right? And then now, the difference between the column 2 and column 3, right? And then this part is called activity variance. Okay. And for this part, it has nothing to do with the kind of managerial efficiency or managerial effort, etc. Right? So the part that's more meaningful is we call this the spending or revenue variance, which is the difference between column 1 and column 2. So does this make sense? Because I need to review them more so that this would not be so difficult for you. But once you get familiar with this, then everything will be very similar. And then how we calculate the numbers in the current tool, okay, in a flexible budget. So basically, we use the same function or the same formula. It's the planning budget, right? Now we plug in the actual quantity or actual output. Do you have any question on this so far? So I would encourage you to ask any questions you may have so that I can explain it clearly before I start to solve the question. So you only need to understand about the formulas, etc. And then you can just kind of write down all the formulas in the cheat sheet you can have for the final exams. So you can still have the same cheat sheet as before, as the 2 midterm exams. And then now for the first question, then the developed label in the planning budget format will be closest to. Okay. So we know here is how we do the planning budget. Right? We have a formula, and then if we plug in the planning activity label or planning output, right, then we can get the developed label costs in the planning budget. And more specifically, so let's just kind of go back to the budgeting. Right? So in the budgeting for developed label, right, we have a function right here. Okay. So basically, the fixed labor cost will be 0, while the variable element per unit of developed labor will be 3.9. Right. So that's why now this is the function we have. So all the functions would be linear. So will be kind of the cost will be equals to the fixed component plus the variable component. Variable element and then multiply by the kind of the planning output. Right? Because we plan to produce 5,900 units of output, right? And then we plan that each so the variable developed labor cost per unit will be $3.9, right? So basically, we can just plug in this formula for the cost function for developed labor, right? Developed labor, and then we plug in the planning output. So should be 0 plus 3.9 multiplied by the planning output. And emphasize that this should be the planning output. And then once we just kind of do this calculation using the calculator. And so also for the final exams, you can also bring a calculator. And then this is how we solve here, right? So the developed labor cost will be equals to the fixed plus the variable components multiplied by the Q, which is the planning output. Because here we are calculating the planning budget. Any questions so far? No. Okay. Then in 5.2, okay. Now you should be very careful. Now this is the flexible budget, right? Now it's the developed material cost in the flexible budget. So if it's the flexible budget, it's very flexible because it's based on the actual output. Right? That's why now we still use the same formula. So for developed materials, the formula is here. Developed materials, the formula is 0 plus 12.1 multiplied by the number of units. And then here for quantity, then we need to use the actual level of activity. So this is the difference. So we need to plug in the 5,940 units. So that's why in the second question, we need to plug in 0 here. This is the fixed cost. Right? And then we had a variable cost, which is the 12.1. And then multiplied by the actual output. This should be the actual output. Because now is the flexible budget instead of the planning budget. So basically, this is the number in the column 2 for the flexible budget. This is the number in the column 2. And then for the planning budget, this is the number in the column 3. So I would encourage you to ask any questions if you have any. Then for 5.3, the activity variance for developed level. Okay. And we know that for what is the activity variance, right? So activity variance is the difference between column 2 and column 3. Between column 2 and column 3. This is the activity variance. And then, so now we calculate the developed labor costs for the flexible budget. So this is the column 2. And also the one for the planning budget, this is the column 3. And now, because now the flexible budget is greater than the planning budget, okay, so it kind of means that the variance is the unfavorable. Because now we actually produces more output, okay, and this would make us that we need to spend more costs or expenses, and this is not good from the the perspective of the profit or net income, right? So that's why now we had a higher expenses because now the flexible budget is greater than the planning budget. And also another way you can solve this is that, so you can also solve, you can use the 3.9, right? So this is the variable component, right? To just multiply by the difference between the actual quantity and the planning quantity. Right? And then this will be equals to the 3.9 multiplied by the 40. Right? We don't need to care about the fixed costs because they are always the same in a flexible budget and also in the planning budget. And we will get the same result. 156.
If you calculate it with the fixed cost, it'll just come out the same, right? Because it'll cancel out.
Yes.
Okay.
And also in this question, the fixed cost is 0. And even if fixed cost is not 0, it will still be cancelled out. Because once you plug in the formula, right? So I can just show this basically, because it's A plus BX. And then we use the actual output, right? And then to minus now A plus B times the planning output, right?
The A will be canceled.
and the A will cancel out, right?
Okay.
So it's only equals to the B and N, which is the variable component minus the actual output minus the planning output. And then for the next question, now we want to calculate the revenue variance. And now here we also need to think about what is the revenue variance first. So you always remember that there is column 1, column 2, and column 3 here. And now the revenue variance is the difference in the revenue between column 1 and column 2. Right? So just use the revenue in column 1 minus the revenue in column 2. Right? And the revenue in column 1 is the actual revenue. And the revenue in the column 2 is in the flexible budget. Right? So we just kind of calculate the revenue in the flexible budget. And then we know that the revenue is equal to the per unit selling price, which is 32.6 multiplied by the actual quantity. Because under the flexible budget, we always use the actual quantity. So in column 2, we always use the actual quantity. And then in column 3, we always use the budgeted quantity or the planning quantity. And then how we get the 32.6 is in the question. So let me show you. Because now we know that for the revenue, the function for the revenue, right, is also a linear function. It's equal to the 32.6, which is the variable component multiplied by the quantity. So if you sell 1 unit, then the revenue will be 32.6. And then that's why here we had 32.6 multiplied by the actual quantity. So we can get the revenue in the flexible budget. And we can also have the actual revenue here, 2,564. And now the actual revenue is greater than the flexible budget. Then this is good, right? Because if the revenue is higher, then our profit will also be higher. This is good for the company. That's why this is a favorable variance. So we call this F, right? And then we can just calculate the difference. I will just give you some time to kind of digest a little bit. Okay, and then if not, maybe we can talk about the last part of the question 5. We're going to calculate the spending variance for developed materials. So just kind of the developed material costs in column 1 and in column 2. We call this the spending variance. And then to answer this, right? So first we need to have the actual. We need to have a number in column 1, right? And also the number in column 2. And the number in column 1 for developed materials would be the actual expense, right? For developed materials. So DM is developed materials. And then we want to use to minus the number in column 2. Right? And in column 2, this should be the flexible budget. Okay. And for flexible budget, we still use the same function as the planning budget for developed materials. Now we plug in the actual quantity. So now let's just kind of go back to find out the function or the formula to calculate the developed materials. And then here for developed materials, right, the actual result, the number is given here. Okay. And also for the developed materials, the function is here. So basically it's equals to the 0, which is the fixed cost, plus 12.1 multiplied by the actual quantity. So that's why we can have the function here. We can do here, right? So actual result, this number is given in the question. And then to calculate the developed material expenses in the flexible budget, right? We just use the same function, but plug in the actual quantity. So because now we want to get the number in the column 2, which is the flexible budget. This is the number in the column 1. For the actual result. And we also have the number in the column 2, which is the flexible budget. And we just kind of compare these two numbers. And now, because the actual expense is greater than the flexible budget, okay, so the variance is unfavorable. Because now the actual cost or actually expenses is higher than the flexible budget. And this is not good for the company from the profit or net income perspective. And this is the question 5, right? And any kind of feedback so far? Is this kind of difficult or simple for you? Because I also want to get your comment when I'm designing the kind of exam questions for the final. And then if you don't have any question about question 5, maybe we can start at question 6. So this is a question in, okay. And then here is what I would suggest you to do, okay. So you just kind of in your kind of cheat sheet, you just kind of write down all the column 1, column 2, column 3. And column 1 are always the actual result for revenue and also for expenses. And column 2 is the flexible budget. So use the same formula or function as the column 3, which is the planning budget. But we just the only difference between column 2 and column 3 is that if we plug in the actual quantity, right, then this would be the flexible budget. And you just remember that the flexible budget is flexible. because it's based on the future actual realized quantity. But planning budget is not flexible because it's kind of fixed. So because it's based on the budgeted quantity or budgeted kind of activity level. That's why it's not flexible. So the number is kind of fixed there currently. And then now next you just kind of know about the concept. The difference between 1 and 2 is called spending variance or expense variance. And this part is much more meaningful. However, for the difference between current 2 and current 3, this part is not meaningful because it arises only due to the fact that our actual output is different from the planning output. And this has nothing to do with the CEO's ability or kind of efficiency. So most of the time, our focus will be on the difference between current 1 and current 2. And now when we are comparing the numbers in current 1 and current 2, or the numbers in the current 2 and current 3, you just always remember that now we want to study from the profit or net income perspective. So if the number on the left is higher from a profit or net income perspective, then this is good for the company. So it's a favorable variance. And then if the number on the left, so let me just explain this more carefully. So so now there are two situations, right? So we may sometimes compare the numbers in column 1 and then versus the numbers in column 2. Right? And then we call this the spending or revenue variance. And this part is kind of meaningful because it relates to the CEO's efficiency. And then sometimes you want to compare the column 2 and column 3. And then this part is called activity variance because it's only due to the difference in the number of output. Okay. Due to the fact that actual quantity is different from the planning quantity. And then that's why I kind of summarize this so that you can memorize this very well. So if the number on the left-hand side, so when we are comparing the column 1 and column 2, then the number on the left-hand side should be column 1. And also if we are comparing the numbers in column 2 with column 3, then the left-hand side will be column 2. And then, so if the number on the left-hand side, right, so it's better, then I will define what does better mean. Right? Better means the higher revenue or lower expense. This is better from the profit perspective. Basically, if the number on the left-hand side is better, right, then it's favorable. And otherwise, it's unfavorable. because if we think about the total variance, when we compare the column 1 and column 3, we call this the total variance. And this is also the same way that if the number on the left, which is the actual result, is better, then we call this the favorable variance. Because now our actual revenue will be higher, or our actual costs or expenses will be lower. I'm just kind of wait a few minutes so you can kind of digest what I teach. Any questions so far? And then for the questions in question 6, also question 7, these are the questions for in chapter 10. So maybe we will wait until your next class. Now I just want to make sure that you understand what I had taught today. Because by doing this, then you just kind of write down this in the kind of cheat sheet. Sorry, in the final exam, it should be fine. It's this type of questions. But of course, as you can see, this question is kind of difficult. And then also, please kind of do the practice questions after the class. You just kind of hide the solutions, trying to solve it yourself. And then if you really don't know how to answer it, then just kind of take a look at the answers first. I always kind of give you the very detailed answers because this is according to my learning experience. So I don't want you to waste too much time in some questions. If I don't tell you the answers, then after you spend some time in it, you still don't know whether you do it correctly or not. Or if this kind of question is very difficult, then you just spend or waste too much time in it. And then this may not be very efficient when preparing for the final exams. So basically, in my class, you can think that it may be kind of very straightforward, I would say. So for the exam questions or for the quiz questions, also for the homework, I would like to make it kind of more straightforward. So there's not too many confusions in the kind of questions, etc. Because they would also waste you a lot of time. And also, when I'm teaching, I'm trying to teach in a very intuitive way. So if I don't understand the materials very well, then I will not teach in class. And then usually I want to spend more time when preparing for the class. So like this kind of comments, like if the numbers on the left-hand side is better, etc. This is kind of the way that I kind of think about this myself when I first start this kind of chapter. But maybe you cannot find this in the kind of textbook, etc. But I just find this way of kind of memorization just make my life much easier. So that I want to. This has something to do with my kind of a scientific kind of a scientific training before. Right? Also, I have been told to you that I really hate the memorizing a lot of materials. If other professors teach, they can just tell you that okay, just memorize. But then it's very easy to kind of forget everything you memorize. And then you also need to know anything about the final exams. Okay. So the final exams will be on May 7th. So as I already sent out the emails. So far, you don't need to worry too much about the final exams. You only just kind of save the 3-hour period on May 7th in your calendar, and then I will also let you know before the kind of exams, and then it will be conducted via Zoom. So you only need to stay online and then in Zoom, and then I will make the exam question either. I think it will be in a kind of Moodle, so you can just download it to do it, and then later on you can just kind of upload, or just you can just write down and then take a picture in Moodle. Because if you can type very fast, and if you prefer to type, you can also type. Or if you prefer to just write down in a paper, you can also do this and just take a picture. So just which way works better for you, you can just pick either. So I don't want you to just kind of waste too much time in kind of typing, etc. If kind of writing down in the papers would make you feel better, also will save you a lot of time. And you just don't need to waste the time. You can use the time to prepare for other kind of final exams. And then here, we still have 3 minutes left, and I would like to kind of use this for Q&A, etc. I think that because now this is the first time that I talk about this type of questions, so it may be still a little bit difficult for you. But if necessary, I can also teach in the future, because we still have kind of 3 classes, etc. And then we are almost done. So I can also kind of teach and also kind of review for the final exam more. If you don't have any questions, you can also feel free to leave the class just 2 minutes earlier.